Now, just as you can convert signals to observables or listen to signals with observables, you can of course also go into the other direction. And we could, for example, re-add our interval observable here, but now as a property, for example. And therefore, I'll also add the $sign here at the end of this name and create that observable by calling that interval function that is provided by RxJS. And I'll set it to 1000 milliseconds again. Now, just like that, nothing will happen because, as I mentioned, you need to subscribe for something to happen. But here, I actually don't want to subscribe. Instead, I now want to convert this observable here to a signal. Or I want to create a new signal, to be precise, that in the end gets updated whenever this observable here produces a new value. For that, I'll add the interval signal then as an additional property, because just as with toObservable, you have to convert that observable to a signal or set up that listener in a place where you could also inject a value. So either here when setting up a property or in the constructor. And here I'll do it here when setting up the properties. And I'll then use the toSignal function, which is also imported from Angular Core RxJS interop, and pass my RxJS observable, this interval $sign, to it. And that will now give me a signal based on this observable. And of course, with that, we can now use it like any other signal with the effect function, with the computed function, and or by outputting it in the template. And that's what I'll do here. I'll output my interval signal like this, like any other signal in the template. And if you do that and reload, you'll notice one interesting thing. If you watch here where that number is output, if I reload, you see initially there's nothing here. It takes a short while until we see that 0 appear. And the reason for that, and one important difference between observables and signals, is that observables, unlike signals, have no initial value. Now, subjects can be different. You can create subjects that have an initial value, but observables, like the observable created by calling the interval function, those have no initial value. Signals, on the other hand, always have some initial value. Sure, you could set that initial value to undefined or null, but they do have some initial value. Observables do not have that, and therefore, as a workaround, Angular will set the special undefined value as an initial value for a signal created with toSignal. Now, you might want a different initial value, and that's why when using toSignal, you can pass a second argument to that function and pass in a configuration object. There you can configure various things, like manual cleanup, to which I'll get back in a second, but you can also set an initial value and set this to 0, for example, to override that. By doing that, you would now see that even if I reload, we see the number 0 right from the start, instead of seeing nothing initially. And that's just also something you should keep in mind. Observables do not necessarily have an initial value. Signals, on the other hand, do. Now, toSignal does one other nice thing for you. It will automatically clean up the observable subscription if the component where you're using that signal that was created with toSignal gets removed. So when using toSignal on an observable, in the end, you don't need to clean up that subscription or that observable. You could disable this built-in behavior by setting manual cleanup to true. In that case, you would have to make sure that you dispose of that observable manually if the component gets removed, but you don't have to do that.